I'm David Ridgen, and this is The Next Call. In September 1996, Melanie Ethier disappeared from northeastern Ontario. Her mother, Celine, is still searching for answers.
I can't let it go. I need to find her. She deserves that much.
I follow every tip and every theory. Investigations that could break wide open with The Next Call. Available now on the CBC Listen app and everywhere you get your podcasts.
This is a CBC podcast.
Myanmar has been racked by violence since a military coup in February. Now that violence has taken a new and more ominous turn. The military is carrying out air raids against civilians. Some have tried to flee across the border to Thailand, but the government there has pushed them back, and the bloodshed they are trying to escape escalated during the weekend. Those are sounds from the streets as the military opened fire on protesters near Yangon. More than 100 people were killed, bringing the death toll since the coup started to over 500. Tom Andrews is the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. Tom Andrews, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
Your role as Special Rapporteur means that you are the fact finder for the UN in Myanmar. What is happening in that country now?
Well, Matt, it's just getting worse and worse by the day. We had another 15 people at least killed yesterday. We now know that over 500 are dead. At least 30 of them are children. We expect that death toll to rise because several people yesterday were severely injured. We don't expect them to survive their injuries. So things are bad. They're getting worse.
After the killing of more than 100 people by the military on the weekend, you issued a statement that ended with a plea. These are your words. The people of Myanmar need the world's support. Words are not enough. It is past time for robust, coordinated action. What action do you want to see now?
Well, the Security Council is meeting this morning in New York, and they have Myanmar on the agenda. The ideal situation would be for them to act, to establish tough, strong, coordinated sanctions, cut the revenue and all the weapons flowing into Myanmar right now. Cut revenue that's an access to revenue from businesses that are doing business in Myanmar, the businesses in Myanmar and their conglomerates, and then refer the case to the International Criminal Court. Start immediately with investigations and prosecutions of what I think is just increasingly clear that these are crimes against humanity being committed. All those things can happen either through the actions of the UN Security Council when they meet today. Short of that, countries could gather together, coordinate their efforts together, and work as a coordinated whole of countries who are willing to stand up for the people of Myanmar.
If you believe that crimes against humanity are being committed, and this is happening in real time, in front of our eyes, why hasn't there been more significant action already from the international community?
Matt, I don't know. I think that the case for strong, coordinated action could not be more clear, could not be more compelling. You know, we've heard words of condemnation. In fact, just the other day, the Secretary General said that what is needed now is, in his words, a firm, unified, resolute international response. That is exactly right. But we have yet to see that firm, resolute international response.
But help me understand that. You say you don't know, but I mean, you've said that these are crimes against humanity. Why is it that the international community would not take more decisive action?
Again, I don't know. What I do know is that increasingly the international community is responding. They're taking steps. Just the other day, the U.S. Stopped adhering to a trade pact established in 2013. A few days before that, they established sanctions on not just individuals in the military, but their military businesses and their conglomerates. There are steps being taken in the right direction, but they're not coordinated steps. They're not linked. We have over 40 different varieties of sanctions, for example. We need to coordinate them, connect them. Now, we've had a call from the ASEAN countries, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, with Indonesia in the lead, saying we need an emergency summit to address this crisis. I think that's a great opportunity for countries to gather together with the neighbors of Myanmar and establish this very firm, clear, coordinated sanctions regime. It hasn't happened yet, but we're pushing as hard as we can for this kind of action to be taken.
The UN Security Council is touted as a powerful body that can take action in these types of crises. But we know from past experience that some of the key players at that table, specifically Russia and China, often will not take action. Is it possible for the Security Council to overcome these impasses?
Well, it is, Matt, but they have to try in order to overcome them. And I would like, and I know leaders of the civil disobedience movement and representatives of the elected leadership in Myanmar are calling for action. Now, of course, you put your finger on it. We always face the prospect of a veto from China or Russia or both, and that has delayed or actually stopped attempts at votes in the Security Council. I think what should happen, frankly, is that there should be a very clear measure put on the floor of the Security Council. Let everyone stand up and be counted one way or another. That's their job. And if anyone wants to veto or vote against it, okay, that's their right. But then we know who they are. We know why they've taken that action. And then we can then, the rest of the world who wants to stand with the people of Myanmar can move on and do that. I think that the problem here is that the fact that there could be resistance has become an excuse for inaction.
And so in the face of that inaction and facing the prospect of a veto, how relevant is the Security Council?
Well, in this case, not very. They're getting briefings. They're making statements. They've yet to even condemn the coup. They've condemned the violence, but not the coup. So they are increasingly irrelevant when it comes to taking concrete, specific action that I think is necessary.
That's a pretty damning statement from the UN Special Rapporteur.
Well, I'll tell you, the inaction is damning. It is extraordinarily frustrating to be communicating with people on the ground every day, hearing their frustration, their anger, their fear. I mean, this is a reign of terror going on here. We have these marauding troops now going through neighborhoods, destroying property, and then shooting randomly into people's homes. I mean, the people in their homes, some sleeping. A young boy was killed literally in his father's arms. This is terror that's going on. Point blank range killings that we've seen into the crowds, but now the random killings and the terrorism that's being inflicted on these neighborhoods. This is horrible, Matt. And my job is to report. My job is to recommend. So I'm reporting things are horrible, they're getting worse, and my recommendation is to take action.
You have a long history with countries that have undergone upheaval, countries like Cambodia and Serbia, Ukraine and Yemen. Are there parallels that you have seen in past that would offer some sort of roadmap to how to deal with what you are describing in Myanmar?
I think that from all of my experience, the key is focus and tenacity, starting on the ground. I think clearly the way this is going to ultimately be resolved for the good is in the hands of the Myanmar people, and they are showing extraordinary courage, creativity, and tenacity. I just learned this morning that they've had to shut down the lottery. They can't run the lottery because people are boycotting it. We've had 120 of your colleagues in television and radio, state television and radio in Myanmar have been dismissed because they've turned and joined the civil disobedience movement. It's extraordinary what's going on the ground. But what is necessary is for those courageous people to be able to look to the international community, not for a miracle, but for support. And that is what they've yet to receive. And I think in these other cases, there has been, to one degree or another, engagement from the international community and support from the international community. But in all cases, it's really, really up to the people who are on the ground and fighting for their future.
You mentioned that the United States has stopped trade with Myanmar. Ultimately, is resolving this crisis and stopping the bloodshed, is that going to fall more broadly on the shoulders of the United States?
I think the United States can play a critically important role, a coordination role. Of course, there are those in Myanmar that would like nothing better than to see the 82nd Airborne parachuting into Myanmar to save the day. That is not going to happen. But what can happen is that the U.S., with its capacity for leadership, its connectivity to nations around the world, as well as its economic capacity, is really in a very important position to move forward. So we're encouraging the Biden administration to move quickly. I testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, their East Asia subcommittee last week. The administration on that day announced a new set of sanctions on businesses. And what we're hoping is that the administration will step forward now and coordinate, play a leadership role in coordinating the efforts of countries who are willing to step up and put pressure on the regime.
Just finally, before I let you go, in the days following the coup, I spoke with activists and journalists in Myanmar who in some ways predicted this, said that history has shown that the military leaders will crack down and crack down hard. What are you most concerned about? Given what you have seen and what you described, not just over the weekend, but in the last 24 hours, what are you most concerned about?
About a bloodbath, Matt. I think this could get more and more horrible as the days go on. I think that this military junta has demonstrated that there's no limit to its brutality. These are the same. The person leading the entire country right now was in charge of the forces engaged in the mass atrocity crimes against the Rohingya ethnic minority in 2017. This very person is now running the country. So what I fear most of all is just a continued assault on the people of Myanmar and an increase, perhaps even a dramatic increase, in the number of people who are injured or killed.
Tom Andrews, it's good to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Tom Andrews is UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. He was in Washington, D.C.
Throughout the 1980s, a strange phenomenon was sweeping North America.
They were in a panic. And like people in a panic, they want solutions.
Allegations of underground satanic cults torturing and terrorizing children. The thing is, there were no satanic cults preying on children. And nearly 30 years later, the people touched by it all are still picking up the pieces.
This isn't a work of fiction. This is a work of history.
Satanic Panic, available now.
While the world watches, it is the people of Myanmar who continue to suffer. Maung Zarni is a Burmese activist who now lives in the UK. He's also one of the founders of Forces of Renewal Southeast Asia. It's a group advocating for democracy in the region. Maung Zarni, hello to you.
Hello back to you. Thank you.
What do you make of what you've just heard about the UN's involvement or lack thereof in the situation unfolding in Myanmar?
Well, the Burmese public opinion is such that we are sick of hearing the word of Security Council, because we have seen Security Council fail and fail again, and it is failing now. You know, this is the body that has failed in every single world crisis of any significance, and not just in Burma, but Palestine, Yemen, Syria. In this case, in our case of China and Russia are the two, evil or bad guys, because they have proven themselves to be very reliable protector of the Burmese genocidal regime. But, China itself is a genocidal criminal state, according to U.S. State Department report on Uyghurs. And so, we have a situation, to look at the geopolitics broadly. The Security Council that is set up to essentially maintain peace and stability around the world is failing, because veto powers are not discharging their responsibility responsibly.
Let me ask you about the situation in Myanmar. I mean, the country has been under military rule before, but what is making what you're seeing right now? What's different about this moment?
Well, because the National Armed Forces has morphed into, for all intents and practical purposes, nothing but an armed terrorist group. I mean, that's not, a hyperbole. That came straight from the Strategic Advisory Council on Myanmar, made up of two former very reputable UN fact-finders, heading the UN fact-finding mission that found Myanmar to have committed genocide against Rohingya, and also from Tom Andrews' predecessor, the South Korean professor Yang Hee Lee. They just released this statement, 3 days ago after the military went on killing spree, killing over 140 people on the day that was to commemorate the anti-fascist resistance during the Second World War. And so we have a situation where, the National Army was behaving no different from ISIS or Daesh or Boko Haram. And, we've got, on TikTok, the Chinese platform, soldiers, openly saying, we're going to rape your daughters, or we're going to use this weapon. Look at this weapon. We're going to shoot you in the head at night. So this sense of impunity by the troops, not even concealing their identities and saying, and Tom's right, the troops are marauding. It's like, what, this is the situation on the ground. That is what distinguishes this military regime from previous waves of, the coups launched by their predecessor. We have a terrorist regime.
Would you expect, in the face of everything that has been documented by Tom and elsewhere and what you've been describing, would you expect the citizens who have been out protesting the coup to back down if the threat of further military action is waved over their heads?
No, I don't. Because I told BBC almost 2 months ago in the early days of the protest, I think we have a radically different society if we have a radically different regime, the society that matches in its resolve not to be put back under the boot and be terrorized into submission. This is going on for 2 months. It's still the new, basically headline news. This is unprecedented. We have a societal revolution, society-wide, nationwide opposition against what they see as the existential threat. And, on the 26th of February at the United Nations General Assembly, extraordinarily, the Burmese ambassador, sitting ambassador, refusing to take the orders from the new regime and calling the regime the existential threat. And so, that we have a situation where the military staged a coup, terrorized the people, but they have been denied a functioning state because 90% of the state bureaucracy have been brought to a grinding halt by civil servants. And we've got a new generation that is so creative in opposing this regime in the most peaceful and disciplined way. So every single day, the regime focused on killing people in one city, 2 cities, and 40 other cities are protesting today as well. The regime brought in a CNN team using its Israeli, the Canadian lobby based in Montreal. And so today the people are protesting, and that the military cut electricity supplies and issued a statement to security troops, don't kill too much, in effect.
You've said that China needs to be persuaded that it's not in that country's national interest to back the military regime in Myanmar. Who is going to do that convincing?
Well, I think the Chinese will have to be, persuaded themselves because, we have the 40. You don't want to be the enemy of 45 million people right next door, where you have major economic interests such as 800-kilometer long natural gas and pipeline. The public is seething with rage at China, because China is financing and arming and enabling the regime that is terrorizing the country. And so the public openly talk about blowing up Chinese pipeline. That's a major alternative energy security route for the Chinese, that fear conflict in the South China Sea might blockade their regular flow of oil from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states through the Straits of Malacca. So that is one major item that China should be concerned about. There are 59 pumping stations along the 800-kilometer long twin pipeline, and you've got 54 million people that are seething with rage and how much security that this Burmese regime could provide to protect the pipeline. And there are also other interests as well. So it's extremely unwise and unstrategic for the Chinese Communist leadership to alienate 54 million to try to keep the terrorist regime on its side to protect its economic interests. I think only the Burmese people can protect the Chinese the economic and other interests, not extremely unpopular gang of terrorists in general's uniform.
We have a couple of minutes left. The United States, and we were talking about this with Tom, the State Department in the U.S. Put out a release yesterday saying that they condemn the widespread violations by Burma's security forces in the strongest terms. What's the role of the United States in helping to end this?
Well, the U.S. role is extremely critical, and the problem is, in human rights situations, or even in genocidal situations, the great powers do not intervene on grounds of human rights unless, the human rights protection of human rights coalesce or are in sync with their own core strategic interest and the protection of those interests. And so, I think once the U.S. or any other powers feels that its interests are at stake, then we will see the situation where military intervention is possible.
Do you think that's likely?
At this point, not yet. We don't know. We have a situation where, in the middle of Southeast Asia, one of the largest country is on the brink of a unprecedented level of civil war and mass violence. We've got about 15 different armed ethnic organizations gearing to fight and declaring their intention to get involved and protect the people. We've got hundreds of young protesters who realize that in the face of a terroristic regime, non-violence is not going to get them very far. So they are undergoing military training. You don't want another Syria right in the middle of Southeast Asia. This is everyone's interest to prevent Burma from descending further into serious the civil war that will have spillover crisis with refugee flows and whatnot.
Meng Zarni, it's good to speak with you about this, and we will keep an eye on what is unfolding in Myanmar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Meng Zarni is a Burmese activist, founder as well of the Forces of Renewal Southeast Asia, a group that advocates for democracy in that region.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.